Any privately owned businesses, for example, hotels, restaurants, theaters, they all fall into the third title, public accommodation. The fourth title has to do with telecommunications, which is relay services. It's how deaf people communicate using video phones through an interpreter. However, it is closed on Christmas and holidays. Do you believe me? No. Telecommunications services must stay open 365 days a year. The ADA requires complete equality, no matter the situation or day of the year. Now that I've covered the fourth title, the fifth title covers absolutely everything that doesn't fall into the other four. The fifth title covers everything that doesn't fall into the other four. It's the miscellaneous title. For example, other federal laws are full only of the executive branch. Now, what does the legislative branch do? They deal with the press, the Library of Congress. Those are the fourth and fifth titles. They sparingly have to do with using interpreters. What truly annoys me is that I, as a deaf person, have to have an interpreter. And whenever I lecture about the ADA, I could get a skilled interpreter with a lot of knowledge, but doesn't know anything about the ADA. They have no idea about ADA terms or any kind of ADA knowledge. Sometimes these interpreters will mix up ADA terminology. They make it seem like I have a 5th grade speaking level. Some interpreters can make me look like I'm stupid. For example, in this speech I use the term effective communication, meaning the effectiveness and the understanding of a communication. These interpreters will say successful communication rather than effective communication because the sign is the same. The two phrases have entirely different meanings. Therefore, if any hearing member in the audience who is familiar with the ADA will think, oh wow, that woman really doesn't know what she's talking about. Now, I know what effective communication is. However, some of these interpreters don't know what it means. I believe that it's necessary for interpreters to constantly know the ADA inside and out so that things like this don't happen. The first title, again, has to do with employment. It is a regulation of the responsibilities enforced by the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The EEOC is managed by the federal government, so any complaints we have regarding that, we must go straight to the federal government. In that title, there is absolutely no definition, no certain requirements for the interpreter's skills or qualification level. Ever since now, and continuing to now, the EEOC has always decided the level of certification needed for a specific situation involving the ADA. They do this because there is no official written document in the ADA about qualification levels. Within the first title, interpreters fall under the category called reasonable accommodation. Another example of reasonable accommodation could be when a person is in a wheelchair and they roll up to a table and the table may be too low or too high, so it's not comfortable for them. So what you would do to reasonably accommodate them is to change the height requirement of the table. There are many different kinds of reasonable accommodation, whether it has to deal with height requirements, job restructuring, or anything else. Interpreters do fall under this category, and it is just one of those forms. However, the boss is the final decision on whether or not an interpreter will be used in a certain situation. Otherwise, a pen and paper or some other kind of communication can be used. Interpreters are used in many different situations. They can be used for meetings, evaluations, staff meetings, many other things. It really depends on the type of deaf consumer. For example, if there's another deaf individual there, an interpreter may not be needed. If your employer is refusing to comply, your only defense is called undue hardship, meaning that the employer must pay any type of accommodation not being given to a person with a disability. If your boss or employer says they can't afford it, that's not a good enough reason because you're protected under law to be reasonably accommodated. Remember, that is called undue hardship. That falls under the first title. However, I'm going back to the second and third title, which will now be discussed together from here on out. There are two different titles starting with public. There's public entities and public accommodation. Many people get those confused, but they have quite different meanings from each other. Public entities public entities are involved in the local and state government. Accommodation is involved with private companies. The U.S. government enforces the responsibilities onto the Department of Justice to decide what constitutes as a qualified interpreter for this specific situation.